My name is Annaia. I am currently working at Futurice, and today I'm going to tell you a little bit of a story about working with Elm. But because this is a story, we're going to start with a little background. So, this is a spectacular example right here, because the name of this slide is called "The Web is Buggy," and there's supposed to be a picture right there. And it's not loading, and I'm not really sure why. But, point made. So, enter Elm. Pure functional web development for the rest of us. It's easy to learn, it's easy to use. Most of the developers that I worked with on my last Elm project had never touched it before and were able to get productive in like a week, despite it being all pure functional-ish. And, the error messages are very helpful. It's very easy to understand and sort of get started with. And the documentation does a very good job of sort of introducing how you actually get real stuff done with it right off the bat. So it's nice for that. We also have the Elm Architecture. Nice, boring, serious diagram. The basic idea is you have this model, and we create the model, which is sort of the data state structure of the data state of our application. This model gets passed to a view function that you create that then takes the model, outputs some HTML essentially as a side effect, and then returns a message, which then goes through the Elm runtime and into our update, which then, again, makes a new model, and we go around and around in a big circle. This used to be called functional reactive programming, but we don't use that anymore because it confused people, and now you have C# developers claiming they do reactive programming, and it makes no sense. It is super trendy because Facebook tried it. Unfortunately, the result was React, and we all know what that's like. The other nice thing about Elm is we have immutable types. Just like in Clojure, we have immutable data structures. There's no mutation of any kind whatsoever. You don't need it, you don't have it, you don't get it, it's not allowed, and you have a very nice sort of ML-style type system, so it's fairly expressive, you can do a lot of stuff, and it has that wonderful type inference, so you don't have to worry about making sure everything's typed. You can kind of just start writing and then write the type notations later once you figure out how it works. So then you kind of get no bugs, because unless you have a logic error, the type system, if it compiles, it probably works. It's very efficient. Rapid application development. The dream of the 90s is alive in Elm. These slides, this entire slideshow, the actual software framework for this is written entirely in Elm. It took me about a day of work, and the code is up on glitch.com. You can take a look at that later. But generally speaking, I find it's very quick to get up and running with new Elm code or extending existing Elm code because it's functional, so it's very expressive, and the type system kind of helps you along without spending a lot of time debugging. It's enterprise approved. Big companies are using this. Microsoft even has a single open source library in Elm hosted from their account, iZettle, Talink, and yeah, there's a bunch of startups, and so, it's still cool. So, the big project is confidential. I can't tell you where it is or who it's for exactly because NDAs and stuff, and also I kind of forgot to clear it before I did this talk. So, content management app for a major news org, millions of readers a day. Essentially, they have a back end in Scala and a front end in Scala and this content repo, and then the people who write the stuff have this awful third-party XML tool that they have to write everything in and then manage like what pages show up on which page, stories show up on which pages. So we wrote for them an Elm app instead to do at least some of the hard part for us. 27,000 lines of Elm. This is a good example, actually, of how expressive it is. 27,000 lines of Elm, 10,000 lines of JavaScript. That JavaScript basically does nothing but gives us drag and drop support. And that's technically not even required anymore because now Elm has drag and drop support in the standard library. And 6,000 lines of Scala on the back end, but that's technically fudging the numbers because that's only just a simple proxy to the real back end, which is an enormous monolith of terrifying proportions that nearly drove me insane. So, impressive upside. I was talking with my coworkers the other day, and that we know of, it never has gone down. In 8 months working on this project, we had maybe 2 to 4 support instances. All of them were with either the JavaScript drag and drop code, or they were some weird race condition with the Scala backend. It just runs and runs and runs and runs. We had a giant collapse where half of our infrastructure went down overnight because some idiot in Amsterdam deleted a data cluster, and it still kept working. It didn't have any data, but it still kept working. So, I lost my job. So there's this problem that happens is that Elm is so stable, Elm is so quick to develop for, that there was no reason to keep me around to keep maintaining it. There's no work for me because it never breaks, and whenever I get a new feature request, it takes me a week to do, and then it's like, well, now what do I do? So I don't work on this project anymore. And that makes me think. So I'm old. I started developing professionally only about 3 or 4 years ago, but I had been developing, before that I started when I was a kid back in the 90s. And back in the 90s, it was still kind of a thing that you measured the productivity of your programmers by how many lines of code they could crank out. Incidentally, my secret theory is that this is how Java became successful, because if it takes you 2,000 lines to print hello world, then you look very, very productive. And conversely, at the time, there's sort of a legend about, Lisp devs are really lazy. Management hates Lisp devs because, what does he do? He comes in, he sits around and just thinks for 4 hours, writes 10 lines of code, and then he clocks out and goes and has a beer. That's not productivity. And now we have this functional programming is taking over the world. It's everywhere, even languages that aren't functional. Java has Lambda functions now. What the hell is Visual Basic has anonymous functions. I am not making this up. You can look it up. There's even also a free basic compiler, which is a version of the old DOS Quick Basic that also supports first-class functions. And then you add on to that, we're starting to realize that types can be good if you just do them the right way, like ML languages do, and make them fun and easy to use. So now we're getting super, super productive, and we can do all this amazing stuff in no time at all, and oh shit, it's capitalism. So that becomes a problem, a literal economic problem. So if I'm a developer, let's say I'm a consultant. I'm a Java consultant. I go to a client. The client wants a thing built. I tell them, that's going to take us 2 years. That's 2 years of billable hours. Now, if I'm a Clojure consultant or an Elm consultant, I can go, yeah, but I can do the same thing in 3 months. And that sounds really good to the client, and it's a really big selling point, but it's a problem for us because 3 months down the line, now I got no more work to do. So does capitalism does this economic system really reward efficiency? Is the most efficient one the one that us programmers, us consultants, us developers are actually getting rewarded for? I actually don't have an answer to this. But, so we're doomed. What can we do? Aha! I have a solution. We'll make everything harder again. Breaking updates. So, some of you might have heard that Elm 0.19 came out recently. This is brilliant. This is really great, because now, true story, I'm currently in negotiations with that very same project to come back and update it to 0.19. Elm even did this so we break fundamental APIs, The basic browser API itself has been rewritten. Some of the string functions have been rewritten. Time functions have been rewritten. And the best part is, the Elm compiler, technically, for 0.19 is 100% backwards incompatible. If you have a library that has only been written for 0.18, it will not compile under 0.19. You have to update it. Dictate backend APIs. So one of the changes that went through in Elm is we have a new time API. Evan has decided that the only correct way to do time is POSIX time, and so therefore you no longer need APIs to work with anything but POSIX time. And if anyone has a problem with that, his answer is basically, well, just write your own library. And of course it's required to use that because that's all you got. I went looking through the code and the documentation for this, and it links. For instance, there's an instance where it says, oh, to get the time zone of the browser, go to browser.env, and you click browser.env, and there is no browser.env in the browser library. Confusing abstractions. This was something we were actually pretty good at my project. There's this thing that happens with front-end programming where you have to write a lot of things that all kind of look the same. You're writing a lot of input boxes, because it's HTML. At the end of the day, whatever we're writing has to be HTML, and we write the same HTML a lot. So we think, well, we'll abstract that, and now we have this abstraction that requires so many parameters that it's basically its own input tag, except it's badly documented and no one knows how it works. The other thing that's fun with Elm is you have this whole model view update concept, and each actual view in your application kind of needs parts of all of that. So a really great way to slow yourself down is to then split all of those things into separate files so that simple changes require touching 20 different files in your program. That's really handy. Endo functors for days. We could just go way heavier type, skip Elm, let's get PureScript, let's get Haskell, let's make it really complicated so nobody can even touch the code unless they know what a lens is. We could go for the Scala approach, just object-orient all the things. I mean, it's tried and true. It worked for Java, it works for everything else. Hostile dev communities. Never answer any questions. If you've got a Slack, ignore it. They should go on the IRC and see nothing but join and quit messages. Alienate contributors. Contributors have ideas about where your language or your library should go. Why do you need to listen to them? They're fucking idiots. They'd write it themselves if they could do it, right? Never, ever, ever explain anything clearly. If they can understand how to do the thing, it will take them less time to do the thing, and now we're back in our problem again. Elm isn't kind of very good at most of these, unfortunately, which is, again, why I don't have a job. But at the end of the day, we still have CSS, and that will torture us until the end of days. So to conclude, programming is real hard, economics is real dumb, but I used to wash dishes before this, so, I mean, it's good enough. I regret nothing. And I guess, do we have time for questions? If anyone has any, I can try to answer them.
I think they need to try to ask questions. I think that was pretty awesome. Anyone? Yeah.
Thank you for the talk. I want to ask the question, how to sell the Elm to the management and the hardcore React programmers?
Well, I think the thing with Elm is that, for the most part, the way it works is kind of already similar to reactive programming that they're used to. Once you understand the idea of writing declarative code that's more or less functional, the transition, at least that I've seen, seems to be pretty straightforward. The big thing that's different is, learning the ML syntax, and I think Elm makes that a little bit easier than other ML languages by design. In fact, that was another one of the breaking changes in Elm 0.19 is you're now no longer allowed to make custom operators in Elm because Evan's opinion is that this makes things more complicated and confusing. And he's not entirely wrong. The first time I saw the operators for JSON parsing, it took me a little while to follow what the hell was even happening. So opinions are mixed. But I think in terms of the selling point to management, it's like I said, it is fast to develop for. It is really stable. That Elm thing is that bit of Elm code is the single most stable service that I worked with on that entire project for this huge company. Lots of other stuff broke all the time or had endless tickets in the Jira board, but that one just kind of hums along and does what it's supposed to do. And I feel like that's, like the talk says, kind of the blessing and the curse.
Thanks.
So to kind of riff from the OCaml talk, what's the story about sharing like rich data structures with the backend?
Unfortunately, that's something that I haven't spent a lot of time with. I don't know what solutions are out there because I was working with just JSON and REST because that's what we had. We had a Scala backend and we served JSON and some very clever JSON structures on top of that. I'd be very interested to know the answer to that question. I know there are some people that are sort of using Elm with something like Haskell or OCaml on the back end, so you have sort of that, whatever that big I buzzword, isomorphism or something like that, between the front end and back end. But to be honest, I don't know.
From my point of view, the actually most fascinating thing about this was this programmer logic of whether to do a good job or not. And I've heard so many times the saying that programmers are there to make themselves unnecessary, and I don't think I ever saw it happen. The simplest thing you do usually doesn't end up being kind of the solution. It's very hard to get out of that. But the worst thing is that the job of programmers is also to make other people's jobs end. So kind of, I somehow think that in modern times maybe everybody's job is to make most jobs end. And that's maybe also the job of Elm, if it's so good. I haven't tried it.
I mean, fully automated luxury space communism. Sign me up tomorrow. Let's make it happen. I mean, I think that actually you hit on something that is way bigger topic than this talk, but it is a thing. Like, programmers have come under the assumption that because we are the people that make the things, that automate things, we are safe from automation. And I don't know, is it going to stay that way? And how much of the work that keeps us all busy is stuff that are problems of our own creation? That's the thing that I see, and why Elm has worked for me in a way that other languages that make those same promises haven't necessarily done. Is Elm is very focused. It makes single-page web applications. That's what it does. I don't even think you can try to do other things, but it does it so well and works the first time that by not overcomplicating it, We overcomplicate everything as programmers. We love it. I love it. I do it all the time. I wrote monads in Racket with a for loop. That's just ridiculous, and there's no reason to do that. But I did it because I'm a programmer, and that's fun for me, which is probably a sign of a mental illness.
Yeah, that partly answers my question. So, with all the breaking changes in the hostile community, would you still choose Elm if getting developers on board is not an issue, or would you go for something like PureScript?
I bounced off PureScript for the same reason I bounced off Haskell. It doesn't do a very good job of presenting how to actually get my work done. And I think despite the drama over 0.19, I think mostly the changes are good changes. Obviously, they've upset some people, and the way it's handled is the consequence of the BFDL model is kind of sometimes the BFDL has an opinion that doesn't agree with some people, and things get very unpleasant for a while. But I think it could have been handled better, maybe. But it was actually, for all that it's been a big flame war on the internet, it was handled better than a lot. Like, in the Elm community, most of the libraries already that I relied on in the projects that I've written to myself or this project were already long since ported while it was still in beta, because it was available for several years, I think. So, it was very well telegraphed ahead of time, but some of the stuff that broke was stuff that people weren't supposed to be using in the first place. There was a huge thread on Hacker News and on Reddit, this blog post, some guy raving about how terrible Elm was and how mean the community was because they broke the native modules API. The only problem was there is no native modules API. It was just a bit of internal code that no one was supposed to be using, and so when it changed, because that's what happens to undocumented APIs, they change, they weren't undocumented for a reason, then everybody freaks out and it's like, oh no, you've broken everything. But actually, I think Evan did some statistics or something that it was something like 1% of Elm packages even used that. So I don't know. It's a complicated question, but I think in the end, it was handled about as well as it could be for any breaking change.
Thanks for your talk. So now that you're back in the game with the company that you're at the Elm front end for, have you tried billing them your development time upscaled by how much it would take in JS instead? And if so, did it work? And would you
I have the generous fortune of not having to worry about the numbers at my current job very much, because it's a large consultancy and someone else does all the math. But that is genuinely something somebody recommended to me, pointed out to me when I was preparing for this talk. Java consultancy A charges X amount for, and will take 1 year, and Closure consultancy B will only take 3 months. So just charge them the 1 year.
But then you must only deliver in 1 year as well, otherwise they see it.
Well, yeah, you can always just take a lot of vacations. It seems to be popular in Finland.
All right. Thanks a lot. Annaia Berry.